Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CUHK Law. My name is Stephen Gallagher, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this new teaching and learning seminar. And it's very nice seeing so many old friends joining in today, as well as our current colleagues and I think current and former students and colleagues, of course, from different universities, different law schools as well. So the purpose of today's teaching and learning seminar is to introduce some research that is ongoing between my colleagues, Professor Michael Lauer, Dr. Jenny Chan and myself, and that's called Directions in Virtual Teaching and Learning the Law. I've got some slides just to introduce to you what this is all about, so hopefully you can see my slides now, and I'll take a few minutes just to explain about this. Then I'll hand over to Jenny, and then I'll pass on to Michael to talk about the whole project of what's going on. Seeing the video ongoing before of the directions in Directions in Law legal education conferences from the past, we will be reminding you at the end that we have got an upcoming conference in early June, the latest in our Directions in Law conferences. So again, we'll be inviting to that at the end. And also, of course, hopefully at the end there'll be time for some discussion about some of the points that we're going to raise now. So please feel free to unmute yourself at the end, or to I'm not sure if the unmute's been taken off, or to use the chat function to chat in questions, and we'll try and deal with those, or any points about what we're talking about. So let me start by this. We had last year we applied for a grant for a provision to actually undertake this research, which, as you see there, is entitled Directions in Virtual Teaching and Learning the Law. This came from the university strategic plan for 2021 to 2025, and I won't read you through it, but the university has identified the idea that virtual teaching and learning should play an important role in the future, and that the university should be looking into this, that the individual faculties and departments should be looking into this as well. So all programs were encouraged to establish this adaptive program structure and pedagogy to excel in the new normal. I think everyone got fed up with that phrase, new normal, but it's still being used at times by universities, and that we were meant to work towards these following strategic directions. I'm not going to go into all of them, but it was talking about this: revisiting and redesigning program structures and assessment, expanding e-learning capacity, support development of innovative pedagogy, including research in learning science, enhance e-learning for students with special educational needs, launch a number of online courses, and enable mixed mode teaching and revise teaching plans to embrace blended learning. I think every teacher gets worried about mixed mode teaching, because I'm not too sure that many are keen on mixed mode, but we can come to that at the end. But this was all part of the emphasis that had been placed on what faculties should be looking at. Now, as part of this, there was a special grant available for strategic development of virtual teaching and learning. And I think hopefully Jenny will talk a little bit about what virtual teaching and learning means when she talks to you, because I'm not too sure that the university or the UGC who are funding it actually know what virtual teaching and learning is or means, or I think that's part of what we've all got to do, try and work out what virtual teaching and learning is. But the idea was we should provide this sort of roadmap, which fits in with the university's strategic direction, and all of the usual things: develop government structures, enrich the overall educational experience of virtual learning, explore new strategies for longer term visions on VTL, and promote the integration of VTL into practicum and on-site training. So these were all things that we thought were interesting and we wanted to look into. When we put in and we got the grant, we then had to think of what we were going to do. So in our proposal, we said that for our Directions in Virtual Teaching and Learning the Law, we would set up to research a strategy of virtual teaching and learning for the Faculty of Law, building on existing expertise in VTL, which of course we had developed during what the university calls the new normal, during the last few years, and yes, try and build on that. So what we wanted to do was, of course, consider all our courses and programs, consult with our students, and of course with our colleagues, and that's one of the reasons for talking today with all of you, colleagues in CUHK Law and colleagues elsewhere as well, we want to reach out and we want to talk to you and find out your experiences and what you think are good ideas for the future of where teaching and learning the law should go, and how much we perhaps should use online resources and other things which are considered by the UGC and by the university as virtual teaching and learning. We're also going to talk to alumni as well. We want to talk to our former students, the ones who've just left us and the ones who've left a bit further back, to see what their experience is as well and how they think things might be improved by VTL, and also practitioners. We thought, practitioners, of course, they've all been through forms of legal education, so it would be good to hear from those. So that's the idea of the research, is to reach out and talk to people. And Jenny's going to talk about some of that research so far. Michael's going to talk about some of that research where we've been reaching out. But again, today is to try and say we'd like to hear from all of you as well. We want to address a number of important issues. I'll come to those, the ones that we highlighted in the research proposal. But really, it's how can we make the most of the necessity of VTL, that we've had to use it during the pandemic, how we can now use that experience to actually make things better for both teaching and learning the law. And the idea is, of course, that in the end, we will use the existing teaching and learning blog, seminars like this, conference presentations, academic articles, and in the end, the idea is to have a textbook, which perhaps can help as well. So that's our longer term proposals for this. So the issues that we identified in the initial proposal, and feel free to comment on these at the end and tell us other issues you think we possibly should consider. The first was, should students be required to return for face-to-face classes, or should we always provide a choice? Should we always provide them with an online choice? Should all lectures be recorded? That's always been a controversial question for teachers. Should they all be recorded? Should they be made available to students for all time or for a limited period after the lecture? How should we deal with that? Should some courses become or remain blended learning courses? And of course, Michael's had experience of this with his issues in property law. Again, the idea of maybe we should develop more of these blended learning courses. Should some courses become or remain online? And during the pandemic, of course, we've had the experience of a new course being developed in the faculty, the Legal Education Practicum, for our RPG students, which has only ever been taught online. And the question then becomes, why should we go back to face-to-face if it's only ever been taught online? Perhaps it's easier to teach it online, and it's easier for the students to learn if it's online as well. Should some programs be offered as online options? In particular, some of our LLM programs, of course, that's a big issue because we've got a new research-based LLM in law and history and legal history. It could be more useful to perhaps provide that online. The LLM in common law, we've got a lot of our students are in the mainland to come on that as well. Maybe it would be better because of everything that's happened, because of continuing issues with traveling as well. Maybe it'd be better to always offer an option of that being an online program as well. And some of the skills-orientated courses on the PCLL as well. Those are the things we wanted to think about. Should examinations be available in any exam option and or online? Could the faculty use VTL to promote lifelong learning of the law? That's one that's close to my heart as a sort of latecomer to law. I always like the idea of that lifelong learning of the law, not just the idea that people leave school and go straight into legal education. In other jurisdictions, you can come to the law quite late, as I said, on evidence of this. But in Hong Kong in particular, I think it's a problem to come late to the law, especially if, of course, you haven't got a first degree, which is an issue. I think not such an issue in other jurisdictions. Could VTL be used to provide law courses for general education in the university? And that's something that, again, I think has been done over the pandemic. Could VTL be used to provide community projects? And that's the idea of things like the seminar series, the property law seminars, because we've had such a wide following amongst practitioners and interested laypersons as well as academics. Maybe that's another idea of using VTL for some form of community project. So that's the sort of things that were originally considered. Jenny's been doing some consulting already with some of our students and also looking into probably the most important thing, the initial sort of going through all the literature and everything else to try and understand what VTL is and what sort of options are available. So I'll hand over to Jenny. Jenny.
Thank you, Steve. So let's see if I can. So can you all see my PowerPoint slides? Yes? Okay. So let's start. Like Steve mentioned, as part of the research, we have reviewed the literature on VTL or related to VTL. Today, I'd like to share with you some of the findings of the literature review. I would address the topics shown on the screen. First of all, the definition of VTL, models of VTL. We'll also look at the pedagogical implications of VTL. I'll present to you from the perspective of students and teachers. And based on the findings of the literature review, we have conducted an online survey involving CUHK Law students. I'll share some of the findings with you today towards the end of my presentation. So, what is VTL? It is very similar to educational concepts such as distance education, remote education, online learning, computer-based education, digital learning, e-learning, massive open online courses. We compare VTL with these concepts because we find that teachers do use the term VTL interchangeably with these other concepts. And because of the shortage of literature on VTL, we need to examine to what extent we can draw references from studies conducted on educational concepts that are similar to VTL in our research. I'll show you that what VTL and these educational concepts have in common in a nutshell. So VTL and all these concepts are similar in that they refer to a form of education offered either entirely online or partially online. Most of these concepts rely on information and communication technologies, ICTs. ICT enables participants to engage in synchronous and asynchronous modes of communication. Synchronous means the teacher teaches and students learn at the same time, and asynchronous means not at the same time. The key difference between VTL and these other educational concepts is that VTL emphasizes being virtual. So what does virtual mean? It means something that is not real but close to that. And therefore, VTL means creating a learning experience that is close to one in the physical classroom. It is also said that teachers must create a high level of interaction between the participants to make their learning experience virtual. We'll see that the notion of a high level of interaction is something that's valued by CUHK students in their responses to the online survey. Very quickly, we will go through the models of VTL discussed in the literature that are relevant to higher education. First, we all know the purely online model. It means that the teaching and learning activities are conducted entirely in the online environment. Second, we are familiar by now with the blended learning model. It means that the instruction is conducted partially online and partially in person. Third is the mix and match model. I would like to draw your attention to this model because it's important. There are two approaches to how this model works. The first approach allows students to opt for studying online or on campus within the same program. It means that the institution offers online and on-campus programs for the same degree, but conducts them in an entirely separate environment. The second approach is called the hybrid teaching mode or dual delivery mode. Teachers teach at the same time to two groups of students. The first group is students attending in person, and the second group is students attending online. It means that while talking to students sitting in front of the teacher provides live streaming broadcasts to students sitting at home at the same time. The second approach is particularly important for our research. This is one of the predominant approaches used in Australia and in the UK during the lockdown to limit the number of students in the physical classroom and to continue provide education to students who have not been vaccinated or to students who have difficulties coming to school. Some law schools are still using this approach until the end of this year. Law teachers complain about this approach because it is challenging for them to divide the attention between students in the classroom and students on Zoom. However, some studies suggest that some students prefer this approach because it gives them the flexibility to choose between attending classes in person or online. We as teachers, I think, need to think about whether or not this is something we want to continue doing when the pandemic is over, or how we can at least improve this approach to make it less challenging in the future. Now, very quickly, we will go through the benefits and challenges of BTL discussed in the literature. From students' point of view, online learning is well said to offer flexible learning. They like it because it saves them time to travel. On the other hand, they complain about the lack of interactions. They also complain about their home not being suitable for online learning purposes. Some of them have had technical issues, such as not having a suitable computer or poor bandwidth for quality connection. From teachers' point of view, online teaching allows them to use innovative approaches, teaching methods that were not available in the traditional classroom. However, they deem developing an online curriculum from scratch very time-consuming. They also complain that students do not turn on their cameras, so it's impossible to monitor their progress. They don't know if students are listening or falling asleep. They're worried that online teaching may undermine professionalism. They also express concerns about online security issues. Once the video lectures put online, teachers have no control over who can access it. To investigate if these pedagogical benefits and challenges are relevant to CUHK, we conducted an online survey involving LLB and JD students about their online learning experience in the academic year 2020 to 2021. 64 of 500 students responded to our survey. I acknowledge that this is a small sample, but students' responses are very indicative and valuable for the purpose of our research. Part of the research aimed to explore which model of learning students prefer, online or face-to-face. About 80% of the students agree or strongly agree with the statement. Online learning is more flexible than face-to-face learning. About 60% of them agree or strongly agree to the statement, online learning does not reduce my motivation for learning. However, about 50% agree or disagree with the statement, I miss interactions with my teacher and classmates. Yet, about 70% agree or strongly agree with the statement, I would take online courses in the future. Then about 50% agree or strongly agree with the statement, I miss traditional face-to-face courses. As shown on the screen, you can see that students want the best of both worlds. They want learning to be flexible, and they say that they prefer taking online courses in the future. But at the same time, they miss the traditional face-to-face interactions with their teachers and classmates. It is important for our research to try to offer recommendations on how teachers can address this dilemma. Let's continue. We also asked students about their online learning environments. About 80% of students agree or strongly agree with the statement, I have suitable devices and quality broadband for online learning purposes. However, while most students agree or strongly agree with the statement, my home is suitable for online learning purposes, about 23% disagree or strongly disagree with this statement. This indicates that the challenge discussed in the literature review about students not having a suitable online learning environment could be relevant to CUHK students. This may also explain why 60% of students prefer not to turn on their cameras. Hong Kong being known for small and crowded home units can be another reason in this regard. Now, I hope I'm all right with time. Part of the survey asked students to comment about the hybrid mode. 54 students answered this question. 30 of them responded that they actually prefer the hybrid mode. Some responded that they like it because it allows them to choose to learn their learning experience they prefer. Some responded that they like it because it's flexible. This benefit seems to be especially important for part-time students. It also allows students to manage their time better. However, 4 students specifically said they didn't like the hybrid mode at all. And they acknowledge that it's hard for teachers to divide the attention between students in the classroom and students on Zoom. 5 students said that the hybrid mode is definitely not suitable for tutorials because they can't hear what the classmates say in the classroom. And 8 students mentioned that they want their teachers to upload the recordings of the lecture so that they can use it for review purposes. But before I go, I'd like to share one comment made by one of the students. The in-class and campus experience is relatively poor to begin with. Online learning is actually an okay option, although it is currently overpriced for what it is. The hybrid mode should offer lectures online with recordings available to maximize flexibility. Again, you see, flexibility. Face-to-face interactions for tutorials should be improved and better designed through smaller groups. Reasonable workload to ensure students have time to actually deal with issues. Maybe this comment gives us something to think about. Now, coming up, we plan to conduct an online survey studying teachers' views on VTL. Your participation will mean a lot to our research. I sincerely look forward to hearing from you. That's all from me. I'll pass the floor to Michael.
Thanks, Jenny. So let me just share my slides now. Okay, so these are the slides I want to talk to you about. What I'm going to report on is some interviews we had with legal education leaders, mainly from Australian law schools. And the structure of the presentation is I'm going to explain why we conducted the interviews. I'm going to tell you who we spoke to and what we asked them. and then report to you on what they told us. Then to reflect on, well, what lessons are there from what they told us for a recommendation for virtual teaching and learning strategy. What should it talk about and how should the strategy be developed? And then to make some comments about the next steps for this research. So why did we conduct these interviews? Well, as Steve explained at the outset, we're engaged in this project where we're trying to make recommendations to our CUHK Law faculty about a virtual teaching and learning strategy. So we wanted to find out what legal education leaders had, their thoughts, particularly based on the experience of online learning during the pandemic lockdown and afterwards. So what are their thoughts about the present and the near-term future of virtual teaching and learning? So who did we ask? Well, we spoke so far, because it's ongoing, we spoke to the deans of 2 Australian law schools, 4 associate deans of education or learning and teaching, the title varies, again from Australian law schools, and then from a Scottish law professor. So although she doesn't have a formal kind of education leadership role like the other interviewees, she did have a track record of digital innovation in her teaching and learning, and she published about that. So we thought she'd be a good person to speak to. And these were the questions. So we asked the interviewees to introduce themselves, and then to talk about their experience of online learning, which is, is a very broad term. So mainly things like lecture recordings, using Zoom to broadcast lectures, but other digital tools. So what had there been their experience before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then now, as we come out of pandemic lockdowns. And then we asked them, what did they learn about teaching and learning, about assessment, online teaching and learning, online assessment, based on those experiences. And then we asked them, do they think that a new model of teaching and learning, a hybrid model, is emerging because of the pandemic? And are we also coming to a different understanding about who is the teacher in the law school? And then finally, we asked them for their input as to how we should go about the task of developing a virtual teaching and learning strategy. So I'm going to very briefly just go through what they told us as they answered these questions. So what difference did the pandemic make to them? Well, of course, it led to a shift to a greater reliance to online. But what they emphasized is that this was happening anyway before the pandemic. And all the pandemic did was to accelerate the pace of change. It forced people to engage in online teaching and learning, whereas before it had been optional. And then to their surprise, what they learned was that basically it worked very well. Just in terms of teaching and learning interactions, lectures, tutorials, even collaborative work, that could all be done perfectly well online. And in fact, in some ways, it could be better. Some interviews thought there was more interaction in the online environment than there was in the lecture. And of course, there's the possibility it's easier to arrange one-on-one consultations where the expectation is that won't be physical, but will be through Zoom or whatever. So in some ways, it can even be more personal, more interactive. But as Jenny said in her presentation, the downside is the social isolation. The benefit of having to come to lectures, physical tutorials, is that you meet people, you can make friends with them, you can interact with them. And that was really the big loss. And also you could also view that as a loss of professional networking opportunities. Perhaps also an impact of the move online was that it created a new mindset. Students could see that that it was possible to do things online. And so when universities, after lockdown, all the universities that we spoke to all said that the universities were saying, come back to campus now. We're a campus-based university. We want to see you on campus. But as Jenny said, students have come to see that online offered benefits in terms of flexibility and convenience. So they weren't necessarily extremely keen to come back to the physical campus. just in the short term, I mean, what recommendations might we make to the faculty? My first recommendation is this, is that sometimes lectures, seminars, and so on get cancelled because of unforeseen events. Here in Hong Kong, of course, typhoons. And to me, it seems obvious that that should never happen again. That once we know that there's a typhoon, we should not cancel lecture or tutorial, but move it online. That will avoid an awful lot of disruption and has no downside for the students. They can learn just as well that way. Perhaps also that same lesson when it comes to meetings, like faculty meetings. Personally, I don't see any benefit to the physical element. And so they, again, I would say that they should also be moved online. Assessment had to move online because because lockdown meant it wasn't possible to have the traditional physical invigilated assessment. So it meant that universities had to get creative about assessment. And so these might be lessons that are taken forward. So one approach was simply to try to replicate the traditional assessment online. So have students turn up online at a pre-specified time and use proctoring software to deal with cheating. So that's one possibility. But the pandemic also led the law schools we spoke to investigate more intensively other types of assessment, take-home exams or authentic assessments, for instance, getting students to contribute to a wiki or write a policy document. Two of the law schools we spoke to made use of vivas. So in one case, it was students were told that there was always a possibility that they would have a viva about their assessment work. And that would be a way of making sure that it was really their work. So there it had a kind of academic honesty meaning. For another law school, they used vivas for people who were on a borderline, perhaps a pass-fail borderline. Did our interviewees think that the pandemic had led to a new model of learning? As I said earlier, they didn't really. What they thought was that it accelerated the adoption of a model of learning, greater use of digital tools in one way or another, that had already sort of begun before the pandemic. By digital, a lot of the time we meant lecture recording. But for the future, so a lot was learned about what was possible during the pandemic. But looking forward, I think law schools still have this sense that they can see all these new possibilities, but they're still feeling their way forward, still not quite sure about how things will shape up in the future. What about the idea that the conception of who is the teacher, is that changing? And that genuinely our interviewees thought that yes. So the dean of one law school said that before the pandemic, the model was of the lone teacher who had sole responsibility for developing materials, delivering them, assessing, etc. And he thought that was going to be a thing of the past. And there'd be a greater emphasis in the future on teaching teams where teachers work alongside learning designers and IT people in what he called a studio approach. Now, where there are going to be learning designers as part of the teaching team, the question is, where should they be located? Should they be as part of a central university team, or should the law school have its own in-house learning designers, IT people? And there's no doubt that people thought that it was better to have these in-house. They were more accessible. The learning designers would understand the specifics of legal education. And at least one law school had recruited 2 learning designers. But of course, that's not always possible because it's expensive. So quite often it involves using central university people. So reflecting on what our interviewees told us, what does that mean for a BTL strategy? A, what should it address? And B, how should it be developed? Well, on what it should address, reflecting on what the interviewees told us, it should think about this question. Should face-to-face lectures, for example, be entirely replaced with recordings. Some law schools have done that. Now, if you do that, that raises a very difficult question of teaching allocation. Let's say that I teach land law. I teach 39 hours of land law, and I prepare 39 hours of recorded lecture. So of course, in the year one, when I make those recordings, I should be credited with having done 39 hours of teaching. But what about in year two, when I reuse those lectures? Should I still be credited with having done 39 hours of teaching? The dean of one law school said yes, that even though I was reusing recordings, I should still get credit for having done 39 hours of teaching, because I'm still going to have to update them. Preparing the lectures in the first place is more demanding than just giving the lecture live. So that definitely would be the gold standard. But on the other hand, other associate deans were more skeptical and thought that in the second year, I might still get some teaching credit, but not perhaps the full 39 hours. Another approach, instead of having separate recordings, would of course simply be to record the live lecture. So that would be something that the strategy should address, should that take place. And then if that happens, then who should have access to those recordings? Anybody or just some select group? Who would it be? And who would make that decision? The strategy would need to address that. Then something that I think that Jenny and Steve have already said, that some law schools have said that even though they've gone back face-to-face, 100% face-to-face, they've still found the need to have an online option for students who, for whatever reason, can't attend face-to-face. They're physically remote from campus, or they've got professional or family commitments. So that would mean not hybrid, as Jenny described it, but having a fully face-to-face stream and a fully online stream. So the strategy would need to say, do we want to do that? And who should be able to go online? In the longer term, or even, as Steve said, we've got one or two examples already, we want to develop fully online electives and ultimately fully online programs. Is that compatible with being a face-to-face campus university? As I said earlier, do we want to have faculty level learning designers to work as a team with us as teachers? We saw that the pandemic meant that law schools had to develop more diverse assessment strategies, but they all have academic integrity issues. The faculty strategy would need to address those. We'd also need to address staff development. We need to have mechanisms to allow staff to think about the challenges, how to rise to the challenges of online learning. So those are the headings I think the strategy would need to address. How would we develop it? Well, firstly, you can't think about digital online separately from teaching and learning. So it would have to be an integrated component of a broader teaching and learning strategy. One of the law school deans said that it would need to be developed collaboratively, so listening to staff and students. Undoubtedly, it's going to be shaped by the university's self-conception. All the universities we spoke to said, we are a campus, face-to-face university, and that's going to shape our approach to online. So that's something we've borne in mind. Also, the mission or market niche of the law school, one of the deans said to us, that's going to be relevant. So if you've got a cohort who are working full-time, studying part-time, then you're going to probably want to be more flexible in terms of allowing more online learning because of those benefits of flexibility and accessibility. I think our strategy needs to be informed by theory, so we need to continue that work that Jenny has done with her literature review. So theory, you might think, well, that's a bit remote from practice. We want to just focus on what works. But good theory gives you a lens, to help you to think about the problems. Any strategy will necessarily be short-term. We can't predict the future. All the law schools we spoke to said, we just don't know what's going to happen next. We've got to think about it. And I think we're going to be in that situation for a long time. So the strategy is always going to be one that needs to be revised. One of the faculties we spoke to had gone a bit further. Not only do they have an associate dean for teaching and learning or education, but also a specific associate dean digital. And that might be something that would need to be addressed. Would our faculty want to do that? One of the associate deans we spoke to said that, you know, that yes, the university wanted to go back to face-to-face. We're a face-to-face campus. But the vice chancellor of that university had come up with a phrase of a sticky campus. So there's got to be a reason to come to campus. We've got to give, the campus has got to be such that students see value in coming there. And he went further and said, anything that can be done online should be done online. So I think that's, of course, that's not a question for the faculty, that's a university level question. What can the university do to make sure that being on campus adds value to student learning? What are going to be the next steps? So we've talked about this already. So I think write all this up as an article, make our recommendations to the faculty, but also conduct 4 interviews. So we've spoken to mainly Australian leaders, I think New Zealand, UK, other jurisdictions. And then also interviews and seminars to drill down on some specific topics, getting closer to practice and practicality. So that's my email address. I'd love to hear from you, any questions or comments. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michael. So we've already got a couple of questions that have come in, and also some very useful suggestion from our former colleague Swati, who is with us today, about a course that she's been on and a blog she's running as well. Let me just go to well, that first point. I'll follow up if you don't mind on it. The point you said about anything that can be done online should be done online. And you mentioned things like meetings. I had a conversation with one of our colleagues yesterday who just said to me, in the future, will all of our faculty meetings have an online option? Because they were just saying, you know, sometimes coming in for what can be quite a short meeting at times, it's the good news about CUHK Law, we have quite short meetings, can be sort of quite disruptive. They do want to attend, but it would be quite good. What do you think, Michael? And is that the sort of thing?
Well, I think so. I mean, this may be a personal view, but quite often meetings are kind of one person speaking. But there is some interaction sometimes. But you know, sometimes meetings are kind of to convey information, and that can perfectly well be done online. And even where there's interaction, I mean, we've had plenty of experience now of online meetings. There's been no difficulty with people contributing their views. So I do feel that at least an option.
Yes, thank you very much. For Jenny, the question that came in there, you mentioned that one of the students had said that the courses were overpriced, or the programs were overpriced, which, you know, it's a valid point for people to raise as well. But did they then suggest that online would be a way of reducing the price for courses?
That particular student didn't mention that whether or not an online option would reduce the tuition price, but at least from this comment, we should get the perception that at least some students and perhaps their parents think that online learning should be priced at a price that is lower than what we are currently charging from students, or the online learning model should be less expensive than the face-to-face model. At least that is their expectation. And if we are going to charge the same amount, like what Michael mentioned, we need to add value to their learning experience to make them see that their money is worth the experience is worth the money.
I don't know if Michael's got anything to add to that. Did you want to come in on the idea of lower prices for online courses?
Well, I think that's beyond our pay grade in a sense, but in one, I find it difficult to see really because if you say that I mean, what less is being given? The thing that's less is what you identified, Jen, and our interviewees identified, is the social element. I agree that's what's being lost. But in pure teaching and learning terms, I just don't see it. And certainly in terms of the cost to us of providing it, I don't see, the argument for reducing it. But as I say, luckily, I don't think that's our concern. That's also going to be a university concern.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're quite right in the terms of the input that's put into the teaching. I suppose there is you don't need the physical premises to actually carry things out. That's, I suppose, how it's looked at. The only thing I would say that the university and the faculty's mission statements, both of them talk about providing more of a service to people in Hong Kong and in the wider area as well. And often, of course, financial constraints are a problem with accessing education. So I suppose if virtual teaching and learning, if online learning can actually help in that way, that might be a way forward. But we now got a question which is actually good, because we have two questions that sort of are on the same thing from our Associate Dean Teaching and Learning, Professor Queenie Lai. She said, thanks very much for sharing the interesting finds, and great idea to do the online survey involving CUHK teachers as well. Would you agree that ultimately the faculty's VTL strategy has to be largely in line with the university strategy and policies? Should the faculty be given more discretion to develop its own strategy and policies? And the other question I had just before was, can the faculty go alone in this? Could a faculty of law or any faculty go alone in going more online if the university isn't committed to it? Michael, I suppose that's formal.
Well, I don't know the answer to that fully, because I think it goes back to what I said earlier, that the strategy is going to be shaped partly by the university's conception of being online, being a physical campus. So you could imagine that the university might want to lay down, let's say, teaching allocation practices and tell faculties, this is how you're going to do it. So I think, I think the university, I think to some extent it is going to be a university level thing.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know if Queenie wants to come back on that at all, but for me, with my experience of the university and actually with this whole project, I'm a little bit worried that the university hasn't got its own, it makes this idea of commitment to VTL, but I don't think it really understands what VTL is, as Jenny's been working on trying to work out exactly what VTL is. I think it sounds like a good catchphrase, buzzwords or whatever else at the moment, so I'm not too sure of the commitment. So Queenie's point is really, I suppose, would the faculty get not just discretion to develop its own strategy, but support from the university if it was to go this way? I mean, Michael, you've had experience of this with your own course, where you had to have a blended learning course where you had to get special permission to actually provide that.
Yes, well, that's right. So that issues and property law course that you mentioned earlier, and each faculty was told. So, and the issue there was that the students were only going to be required to be in class for about 8 hours or something, or 9 hours, whereas the expectation is 39 hours in class. So the Senate Committee on Teaching and Learning decided that each faculty could have 2 courses where you could apply for special dispensation from the norm of 39 physical hours. So that's a hassle, isn't it? I mean, the fact that you've got to go through a special process and get permission, and only 2 people can have permission, of course, it's going to slow things down. I did get the impression, speaking to the Australian law schools, they have much more flexibility than we have in terms of just, a teacher just saying, oh yes, I'm going to just online lectures. But that's definitely, I think, that's I think it's something the university will get involved in.
I mean, just following up on that, it comes back to your point about the recordings and where some deans have said that they would accept that if someone recorded 1 year, 20 hours of recordings, that would count towards their teaching for the second year. And it just seems to be a very crude device. I do know that it's applied sort of differently within the faculties, even at CUHK. So I know that some of my friends in other faculties don't have to give 39 contact hours, but maybe because we're lawyers, we always follow the rules.
I think the reason that dean gave, saying he would just say, if you recorded 29 hours of lectures, you get 20 hours of credit every year. That's saying his reasoning was that, well, look, it's going to be very costly to produce them in the first place. They will need updating. And if you were to make a judgment each year about, well, how much it will give you next year, it'd be so messy and waste so much time, you might as well just do away with that and give credit, for the recordings every year.
Or perhaps we just give admin points for them, or something along those lines.
But then people won't do it.
No, that's what I'm thinking. The commitment has to be there from the whole institution.
Yeah.
I think in that way. A question that came in was, are there any thoughts on whether there are any subjects that are inherently suited or unsuitable for online learning? And that sort of then follows up, because the next question was from our colleague, Professor Alan Gibb, who said, with face-to-face learning, what about the soft skills acquired? Can online learning replicate? Anyone want to deal with that one? Michael or Jenny?
I just wonder what the soft skills are on the second part of that. I mean, what the soft skills are that they get anyway from face-to-face calls. So things like collaboration. We did hear from one of our interviewees that they found that even courses that require collaboration could be made to work perfectly well online. So from that point of view, if you think about the other skills that we've talked about before in a previous seminar, like research and writing skills, well, again, that's clearly something that in a certain sense is individual. Consultations can be done perfectly well, like supervisions or whatever can be done perfectly well. So I can't think of a soft skill that we currently kind of develop that couldn't be developed. However, definitely what is lost, not exactly the skill, but just the social isolation. That is definitely a thing. I had one academic advisee, and she was very down in the dumps because she wasn't meeting anybody. And then we went back to face, and suddenly she's bouncy and happy again. So that is definitely, so the social isolation is definitely an issue.
Did that come up? I think it came up in your research, Jenny, didn't it? Those issues to do with the social isolation.
Yes. The sense of isolation felt by students is one thing we need to address in our strategy. And it seems that some students cope better, because I've received comments from students saying that they do not want hybrid, they just want purely online. They do not, it seems that it doesn't bother them that they do not have an opportunity to interact with their classmates in person. But of course, I receive responses opposite to that. It's that the students really, really treasure this face-to-face interactions. They say that they would go through the trouble to go to our Shatin campus just for face-to-face tutorials. For this group of students, I think they treasure face-to-face, and hybrid seems, offering tutorials online, it doesn't seem to satisfy them. Yeah.
What the Scottish professor I mentioned earlier, who is with us today actually, and she said that she thought there may be a difference here between the undergraduate and the postgraduate students. That postgraduate students might already have working life, family life, and not really need to, so they don't really need the university to provide them with that social interaction, and they but benefit from the flexibility, etc. Whereas it may be the undergraduates who much more need the university to provide them with that social experience.
Great, thanks. I've got one comment that's come in on the recording issue from Alan again, from Alan Gibb. The majority of the UK universities now have very clear policies on recording lectures. Most require permission to opt out rather than to opt in. And Alan is suggesting that CUHK should follow it. You'll make yourself very popular with some and very unpopular with others. And our colleagues are suggesting that one, Alan. But a good, and again, sort of following up on the earlier point, just to make the point about some courses perhaps lending themselves to online. I do remember that one of our former colleagues, when he was teaching the opinion writing course on the PCLL, actually had decided that it was better, it was easier, he felt, to share documents and to use Zoom for actually the whole sort of feedback to do with that. And that sort of feeds into the question that's come in from Chris. Which says, thank you for an interesting webinar. Jenny highlighted that students want flexibility with hybrid and even high flex, where the session is also recorded as well as live online and in person. There is a risk that the experience will be undermined as students opt not to attend in person or live. Is there a case for being prescriptive for the type of session, but communicating clearly the benefits of these and considering flexibility more broadly? I don't know if either of you want to comment on that. Anyone like to comment?
Actually, is it possible just to have the question again? I thought it was for Jenny.
Sure. It was coming in on the point of the flexibility, and I think at the end it's this. The final question is there a case for being prescriptive for the type of session that can be provided in that flexible manner, but communicating clearly the benefits of these and considering flexibility as a concept more broadly?
Well, you could say, I mean, one possible way of splitting things up, I suppose, would be to say, well, lectures lend themselves more to online, whether pre-recording or whatever, and you might say tutorials, perhaps much more a case for being face-to-face. But I'm not even sure that's totally true, because we've all now had experience of running tutorials, and they work perfectly well. And perhaps you can move a bit further and say, look, one thing I don't think that does work very well online, at least in my experience of Zoom, is putting people into small groups for discussion before feeding into a main group. Maybe just me, I haven't got the skill, but I put people into small groups, and I just have to hope and pray they really are talking to each other rather than just twiddling their thumbs for 5 minutes, waiting for the things to wait for all to come back. Whereas if it's face-to-face, and if the classroom is properly configured, like some classrooms have got little clusters, so you can sit around in groups of 5, then you could say that's an example of where the physical configuration can really help collaborative work in a way that perhaps the online doesn't.
Sorry, Jenny, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think that the issue with flexibility, well, my impression is that students find that it's not worth their while to travel all the way to Shaoqing campus just to sit there and listen to lectures, which is something that they find they could have done easily through the internet or through Zoom. It is the quality of their learning experience that they value, I think, and like I said earlier, some of them actually mentioned that they prefer physical to attend the lecture physically because they find the interactions very valuable for their learning. Yeah.
And can I just add something in? So just a point that one of the deans we spoke to made is that what she found was that sometimes after the pandemic, students were coming and watching coming to campus to watch the lecture recording. I don't know if you remember that, you were both in that interview. So they were coming to campus to watch the lecture recording, presumably because they thought the lecture recording format was better, but coming to campus gave them that kind of social experience. They could watch the lecture together. So that's an interesting thing. Perhaps as an example of a sticky campus. And what should be the policy response of the university there to make sure there are enough rooms on campus that people can do that, you know.
Great, thank you very much.